landscape. The footpath had joined a narrow, metalled road. This was the route he'd generally have taken in the old days. He had rarely used the footpath, except for the occasional weekend stroll. He'd take the main road up from the town and turn off towards the village, finally ending up on this narrow track that led to the house. The road was barely wide enough to accommodate 2 lanes, although in those days the chances of encountering other traffic up here were low. He wondered whether that had changed over the years, whether there was more housing up here now, new builds for families seeking to escape the urban sprawl. Somehow he doubted it. By the time he reached the first house, the darkness had fallen completely. The place looked largely unchanged from his time here. It could hardly even be called a village. It was little more than a cluster of houses surrounding the tiny church. It had been a much larger community once. Farm buildings and workers' cottages serving the local farms, and the long abandoned cotton mill down in the valley. Some of the houses had fallen into ruin, now barely discernible in the surrounding landscape. The few remaining cottages had gradually been renovated over the years, often being combined to create larger buildings. Some were now weekend or holiday homes, with a few occupied by couples and families commuting into Manchester or Stockport. He could understand why. The views up here were spectacular, and the sense of remoteness belied the proximity to the suburban housing a mile or so below. That had been what had brought the family up here when the children were small. All of that, though, was something that had happened to another man, a man he no longer knew or understood. The house itself seemed as unaltered as everything else. The road behind had been unlit, but by the houses and church there was a scattering of streetlights. As he passed, he could see that the front garden was overgrown. The paintwork needed attention. They'd been proud of the place when they'd first moved in, spending weekends decorating, working on the garden, creating a family home. They were still a family, he supposed, those that remained. He paused for a moment as he passed, making sure he stayed in the shadows. There were lights showing in a couple of the windows, but no other signs of life. He imagined they were all in there, but would never know for sure. Finally, he continued past the house to the gateway to the churchyard. When he'd first moved here, the church had already felt half abandoned, with services held only once a month, and on church holidays. The vicar traipsing up here from the larger church in the valley. He'd half expected that by now the church would have been deconsecrated, sold off, perhaps turned into another gentrified residence. But he'd checked before setting off, and discovered that this was unchanged too. A different vicar, but the same monthly services, presumably attended by the same or a similar handful of people. He turned for one last look at the view. It was fully dark now. The final dregs of crimson drained from the western sky. Manchester was a haze of light, the relative dark of the Cheshire Plain stretching away to the south. As the forecast had predicted, clouds were moving in from the west, obscuring the few visible stars. It took him only a few moments, searching in the darkness to find the grave. The church was no longer used for burials, and this had been one of the last bodies interred here at the far end of the graveyard, along with 2 or 3 others from the same year. He read the inscription on the black marble, just the name and the brief years of life. Nothing about the person, nothing about the death or what had followed. He looked around for any other signs, but the overgrown churchyard was giving nothing away. This